The Story of Leela. Vasishta continued, O Rama, even as from the waking state experience there is no materiality in the objects seen in a dream, though while dreaming the objects appear to be solid, this world appears to be material, yet in reality it is pure consciousness. There is not even a temporary or subtle river in the mirage. Even so, there is no sense, a real world, but only pure consciousness. Only knowledge based on ignorance clings to the notion of a world. In reality, there is no difference in the meaning of the words world, Brahman, or the infinite, and self. The world is as true in relation to Brahman as the dream city is true in relation to the experience of the waking consciousness. Hence, world and cosmic consciousness are synonyms. To make all this crystal clear, O Rama, I shall now narrate to you the story of Mantapa. Pray listen attentively. Once upon a time, there was a king on earth called Padma. He was perfect in every respect, and by his own nature and conduct, he enhanced the glory of his dynasty. He honored religious traditions even as the ocean respects the authority of the shore. He subdued his enemies even as the sun routs darkness. Even as fire reduces hay to ashes, he destroyed evil in society. Holy men resorted to him even as gods resort to heaven. He was the abode of virtue. He made his enemies tremble on the battlefield even as a gale ruffles as a creeper. He was highly learned and a master of arts. To him there was nothing impossible of achievement. Even as to Lord Narayana, there was no impossibility. This king had a wife by name Lila. She was highly accomplished as a woman and was very beautiful. It appeared as if she was goddess Lakshmi, incarnate on earth. She was soft-spoken, her gait was slow and graceful, and her smile radiated the cool delight of moonlight. She was sweet as honey, her arms were soft and delicate, her body was as pure and clear as the waters of the holy river Ganga. And even as a touch of the waters of the Ganga gives rise to bliss, to touch her was to experience bliss. She was highly devoted to her husband Padma, and knew how to serve him and to please him. She was one with the king and shared his joy and sorrow. She was in fact the alter ego of Padma, except that when the king became angry, she merely reflected fear. Vasishta continued, King Padma and the Queen Leela lived an ideal life. They enjoyed their life in every possible and righteous way. They were young and youthful like the gods, and their love for each other was pure and intense, without any hypocrisy or artificiality. One day, the Queen Leela thought, the most handsome king, who is my husband, is dearer to me than even my own life. What should I do in order that he and I may live forever enjoying the pleasures of life? I shall immediately undertake such austerities as the holy ones would suggest in order that I may fulfill my ambition. She sought the counsel of the holy ones. The holy ones said to her, O Queen, austerities or penance, repetition of mantras, and a disciplined life will surely bestow upon you all that it is possible for one to attain in this world, but physical immortality is not possible of attainment in this world. The queen pondered this advice and decided, if I should die before my husband, then I should attain self-knowledge and be free from sorrow. But if he should live before me, then I shall so strive now as to obtain a boon from the gods that his Jiva does not leave our palace. I shall be happy to live in it in the knowledge that he is always with me. Thus resolved, Lila began to propitiate the goddess Saraswati immediately, without even discussing this project with her husband. Once in 3 nights she used to eat. After devoutly worshipping the Lord, holy ones, the preceptor, the learned ones, and the sages, she used to eat. She was utterly convinced that this penance would prove fruitful, and this conviction greatly strengthened her application to the penance undertaken. Though she did not reveal her intention to the king, she did not let her service to her husband suffer in the very least on account of the penance. After 100 such 3 nightly worship, the goddess Saraswati appeared before her and granted her the boons of her choice. Leela prayed, O Divine Mother, grant me 2 boons. When my husband departs from his body, let his jiva remain in the palace. And whenever I pray to you, let me see you. Saraswati granted these 2 boons and disappeared. Time inexorably passed. King Padma, who was mortally wounded on the battlefield, died in the palace. Queen Leela was inconsolable with grief. When she was thus sunk in grief, an ethereal voice spoke to her. The ethereal voice of Saraswati said, "My child, cover the king's dead body with flowers, then it will not decay. He will not leave the palace." Leela did so, yet she was not satisfied, and she felt like a wealthy man who had been tricked into poverty-stricken existence. She invoked Goddess Saraswati, who appeared before her and said, "My child, why do you grieve? Sorrow, like water in mirage, is an illusion." Leela asked her, "Please tell me where my husband is." "Oh Leela, there are three types of space: the psychological space, the physical space, and the infinite space of consciousness. Of these, the most subtle is the infinite space of consciousness. By intense meditation on this infinite space of consciousness, you can see and experience the presence of One, whose body is that infinite space, even though you do not see him here. That is the infinite space which exists in the middle when the finite intelligence travels from one place to another, for it is infinite. If you give up all thoughts, you will here and now attain to the realization of oneness with all. Normally, only he who has realized the utter non-existence of the universe can experience this, but you will do so by my grace." Leela began to meditate. Immediately she entered the highest state of consciousness, free from all distractions. She was in the infinite space of consciousness. There she saw the king once again, on a throne surrounded by many kings who adored him, by many sages and holy men who chanted the Vedas, by many women and by armed forces. She saw them, but they did not see her, as one's thought forms are visible only to oneself, not to the others. She saw that the king had a youthful body. She also saw in his court very many members of the court of King Padma. She wondered, are they all dead too? Again, by the grace of Goddess Saraswati, Leela came back to her palace and saw her attendants asleep. She woke them and asked them to request the members of royal court to assemble at once. Messengers were quickly dispatched to summon all, and very soon the royal court of King Padma was teeming with the ministers, sages, civil servants, relations, and friends. Seeing them all there, Leela rejoiced. Seeing all the members of the royal court, Leela was puzzled. She thought, "This is strange, for these people seem to exist in two places at the same time, in that region which I saw in my meditation and here in front of me. Just as a mountain is seen both inside the mirror and outside it, this creation is seen both within consciousness and outside it. But which of these is real and which is the reflection? I must find out from Saraswati." She adored Saraswati and saw her seated in front of her. Leela asked, "Be gracious, O goddess, and tell me this. That on which this world is reflected is extremely pure and undivided, and it is not the object of knowledge. This world exists both within it as its reflection and outside as solid matter. Which is real and which is the reflection?" Saraswati asked, "Tell me first, what do you consider real and what unreal?" Leela answered, "That I am here and you are in front of me, this I consider real. That region in which my husband is now, that I consider unreal." Saraswati said, "How can the unreal be the effect of the real? The effect is the cause. There is no essential difference. Even in the case of a pot which is able to hold water, whereas its cause, clay, cannot, this difference is due to the cooperative causes. What was the material cause of your husband's birth? For only material effects are produced by material causes. Hence, when you find no immediate cause for an effect, then surely the cause existed in the past. It's a memory. Memory is like space, empty. All creation here is the effect of that emptiness. And hence the creation is empty too. Even as the birth of your husband is an illusory product of memory, I see all this as the illusory and unreal effect of imagination. I shall narrate to you a story which illustrates the dreamlike nature of the creation. In pure consciousness, in a corner of the mind of the Creator, there was a dilapidated shrine covered with a blue dome. It had the 14 worlds for rooms. The three divisions of space were holes in it. The sun was the light. In it there were little ant hills, the cities, little piles of earth, mountains, and little pools of water, the oceans. This is creation, the universe. In a very small corner of it, there lived a holy man with his wife and children. He was healthy and free from fear. He performed his religious and social duties well. Saraswati continued, "That holy man was known as Vasishta, and his wife was Arundhati. though they were different from the Vasishta and Arundhati of the legendary fame. One day, when that holy man was seated on the top of a hill, he saw at the foot of that hill a colorful procession on the move, with a king riding a stately elephant, followed by an army and other royal paraphernalia. Looking at this, a wish arose in the heart of the holy man. Indeed, the life of a king is rich and full of delight and glory. When will I ride a royal elephant like that and be followed by an army like this? Sometime after this, the holy man grew old, and then death overtook him. His wife, who was highly devoted to him, prayed to me and asked for the same boon that you asked for, that her husband's spirit should not leave her house. I granted her that boon. Though that holy man was an ethereal being, on account of the power of his constant wish during the previous lifespan, he became a mighty king and ruled over a great empire which resembled heaven on earth. He was dreaded by his foes. He was indeed a Cupid to womenfolk. He was stable and firm against temptations like a mountain. He reflected all the scriptures within himself like a mirror. He was the wish fulfiller of everyone in need, and he was the resting place of holy men. He was indeed the full moon of righteousness. Arundhati had also given up her body and attained reunion with her husband in due time. It is 8 days since this happened. Lila, it is the same holy man who is now your husband, the king, and you are the same Arundhati who was his wife. On account of ignorance and delusion, all this seems to take place in the infinite consciousness. You may regard all of this as true or as false. Lila asked, "Oh goddess, all this seems so strange and incredible to me. It is like saying that a huge elephant is bound in the center of a mustard seed, or that in an atom a mosquito fought with a lion, or that there is a mountain in a lotus pod." Saraswati said, "My dear, I do not utter falsehood, but I am telling the truth. It sounds incredible, but this kingdom appears to be only in the hut of the holy man on account of his desire for a kingdom. The memory of the past is hidden, and you too have risen again. Death is but waking from a dream. Birth, which arises from a wish, is no more real than the wish, like waves in a mirage." Saraswati continued, "Leela, your house, you, I, and all this is pure consciousness, nothing else. Your house was itself in the house of the holy man Vasishta. In the space of his Jiva existed the rivers and the mountains and so on. Even after the quote-unquote creation of all this in the holy man's house, it remained as it was before. Indeed, in every atom there are worlds within worlds." Lila asked, "Oh goddess, you said that it was only 8 days ago that the holy man had died, and yet my husband and I have lived for a long time. How can you reconcile this discrepancy?" Saraswati said, "Oh Leela, just as space does not have a fixed span, time does not have a fixed span either. Just as the world and its creation are mere appearances, a moment and an epoch are also imaginary, not real. In the twinkling of an eye, the Jiva undergoes the illusion of the death experience, forgets what happened before that, and in the infinite consciousness thinks, I am this, I am that, etc. I am his son, I am so many years old, etc. There is no essential difference between the experiences of this world and those of another. All this being the thought forms in the infinite consciousness. They are like two waves in the same ocean. Since these worlds were never created, they will never cease to be. Such is the law. Their real nature is consciousness. Even as in a dream there is birth, death, and relationship, all in a very short time, and even as a lover feels that a single night without his beloved is an epoch, the Jiva thinks of experienced and non-experienced objects in the twinkling of an eye, and immediately thereafter he imagines those things to be real, even those things which he had not experienced nor seen present themselves before him as in a dream. This world and this creation is nothing but memory, dream, distance, measures of time like a moment and an age, all these are hallucinations. This is one kind of knowledge, memory. There is another which is not based on memory of past experience. This is the fortuitous meeting of an atom and consciousness which is then able to produce its own effects. Liberation is the realization of the total non-existence of the universe as such. This is different from a mere denial of the existence of the ego and the universe. The latter is only half knowledge. Liberation is to realize that all this is pure consciousness. To merely deny the existence of ego and the universe is half knowledge. Liberation is to realize that all this is pure consciousness. O goddess, without prior hallucination, how was the creation of the holy man and his wife possible? Saraswati said, indeed, that was due to the thought form of Brahma, the creator. He himself had no hidden thought forms, for before creation there was dissolution, and at that time the creator had attained liberation. At the beginning of this epoch, someone assumes the role of the creator and thinks, I am the new creator. This is pure coincidence, even as one sees a crow alighting on a palm tree and the coconut falling. Though these two are independent of each other, of course, do not forget that even though all this seems to happen, there is no creation. The one infinite consciousness alone is thought form or experience. There is no cause and effect relationship. These cause and effect are only words, not facts. The infinite consciousness is forever in infinite consciousness. Lila said, O goddess, your words are truly enlightening. However, since I have never been exposed to them before, the wisdom is not well grounded. I wish to see the original house of the holy Vasishta. Saraswati said, O Lila, give up this form of yours and attain the pure spiritual insight, for only Brahman can really see or realize Brahman. My body is made of pure light, pure consciousness. Your body is not. Within this body of yours, you cannot even visit the place of your own imagination. Then how can you enter the field of another's imagination? But if you attain the body of light, you will immediately see that holy man's house. Affirm to yourself, I shall leave my body here and take the body of light. With that body, like the scent of incense, I shall go to the house of the holy man. Even as water mixes with water, you will become one with the field of consciousness. By the persistent practice of such meditation, even your body will become one of pure consciousness and subtlety. For I see even this, my body is consciousness. You do not, for you see the world of matter, even as an ignorant man might mistake a precious stone for a pebble. Such ignorance arises of its own accord, but is dispelled by wisdom and inquiry. In fact, even such ignorance does not exist. There is neither unwisdom nor ignorance, neither bondage nor liberation. There is but one pure consciousness. Saraswati said, Dear Leela, in dream, the dream body appears to be real. But when there is an awakening to the fact of dream, the reality of that body vanishes. Even so, the physical body, which is sustained by memory and latent tendencies, is seen to be unreal when they are seen to be unreal. At the end of the dream, you become aware of the physical body. At the end of these tendencies, we became aware of the ethereal body. When the dream ends, deep sleep ensues. When the seeds of thought perish, you are liberated. In liberation, the seeds of thought do not exist. If the liberated sage appears to live and to think, he only appears to do so like a burnt cloth lying on the floor. This is, however, not like deep sleep nor unconsciousness, in both of which the seeds of thought lie hidden. By the persistent practice, egotism is quieted. Then you will naturally rest in your consciousness, and the perceived universe heads towards the vanishing point. What is called a practice? Think of that alone, speaking of that, conversing of that with one another. Utter dedication to that one alone, this is called practice or abhyasa by the wise. When one's intellect is filled with beauty and bliss, when one's vision is broad, when passion for sensual enjoyment is absent in one, that is practice. When one is firmly established in the conviction that this universe has never been created, and therefore it does not exist as such, and when thoughts like this is world, this I am, do not arise at all in one, that is abhyasa, that is practice. It is then that attraction and repulsion do not arise. The overcoming of attraction and repulsion by the use of will force is austerity, not wisdom. At this stage, evening set in and the court dispersed. Early next morning, the court assembled and Vasishta continued his discourse. Vasishta continued, O Rama, Saraswati and Queen Leela immediately sat in deep meditation or nirvikapla samadhi. They had risen above body consciousness. Because they had given up all notions of the world, it had completely vanished in their consciousness. They roamed freely in their wisdom bodies. Though it seemed they had traveled millions of miles in space, they were still in the same room, but on another plane of consciousness. Holding each other's hands, Saraswati and Leela slowly ascended to far distant scenes in space. This space was intensely pure and totally empty. They rested on top of the Mount Meru, the axis of Earth. They saw countless interesting sights as they proceeded away from the orbit of the Moon. They roamed within huge cloud formations in space. They entered infinite space, the womb and the source of infinite beings in infinite worlds. They saw the seven great mountains in the cosmos, which were radiant like the fire of dissolution. They saw golden plains near Meru, and they saw the densest form of darkness. They saw siddhas, being with supernatural powers. They saw crowds and crowds of demons, goblins, and other spirits. They saw space vehicles come and go everywhere. They saw celestial nymphs sing and dance. They saw a wide variety of birds and also animals. They saw angels and gods. They saw great yogis endowed with all auspicious qualities. They saw the abode of the Creator, the abode of Shiva, and others. Like a couple of mosquitoes, they roamed all these plains. In short, they saw all that was ready in the mind of Saraswati, and which Saraswati wanted to show to Queen Leela. It was like the lotus of the heart, with the directions for its petals, the netherworld for the mud in which it grows, held by the divine serpent, which is the root. In this lotus, they saw what is known as Jambudvipa, in which there are many countries and continents. It is surrounded by a salty ocean. Beyond that is Shakad Vipa, surrounded by an ocean of milk. Beyond that is Kushadvipa, with an ocean of curd. Then Kraunchadvipa, an ocean of ghee. The Shalmali Dvipa, surrounded by an ocean of wine. Then Gomeda Dvipa, surrounded by an ocean of sugarcane juice. Then there is Pushkara Dvipa, surrounded by an ocean of sweet water. Then there is a cosmic hole. Beyond that is the Lokaloka mountain, shining resplendently. Beyond that is the infinite forest, etc. Lastly, there was infinite space, sheer emptiness. Having thus seen the oceans, mountains, the protector of the universe, the kingdom of the gods, the sky, and the very bowels of the earth, Leela saw her own house. Vasishta continued. O Rama, the two ladies then entered into the holy man's house. The whole family was in mourning. On account of their grief, the house itself had a depressing atmosphere. By the practice of the yoga of pure wisdom, Leela had acquired that faculty by which her thoughts instantly materialized. She wished that these, my relations, should see me and Saraswati as if we were ordinary women folk. They appeared so to the mourning family. But the two ladies were of supernatural radiance, which dispelled the gloom that pervaded the house. The eldest son of the departed holy couple welcomed the two ladies, taking them to be two angels of the forest. He said to them, O angels of the forest, surely you have come here to relieve us of our grief and in our bereavement, for such is the nature of divinities. They are eager to relieve the stress and the distress of the others. The two ladies asked the young man, Tell us the cause of your sorrow, which seems to afflict all these people here. The son of the holy couple replied, O ladies, in this very house there lived a pious man and his devoted wife, who were both devoted to a righteous life. Recently they abandoned the children and grandchildren, their house and their cattle, and ascended to heaven. Therefore to us this whole world appears to be empty. Look, even the birds are crying for the departed ones. Even the gods are crying in grief. The trees are shedding tears every morning. Abandoning this earth, my parents have surely gone away to the world of the immortals. Hearing this, Leela laid her hand on the young man's head. Instantly he was relieved of sorrow. Seeing this, all the others were also relieved of sorrow. Rama asked, O Holy One, why is it that Leela did not appear to her own son as his real mother? Vasishta replied, Rama, he who has realized the unreality of the material substances sees only the one undivided consciousness everywhere. A dreamer does not see this world. A man in deep coma may even see the other world. Leela had realized the truth. He who has realized the truth that Brahman, the self, etc., are all one infinite consciousness, unto him, where is the son, friend, wife, etc. Even her laying her hand on the young man's head was a spontaneous expression of the Brahman's grace. Vasishta continued. Having thus blessed the family of the deceased holy man, the two ladies disappeared. The consoled members of the family returned to their abodes. Lila turned to Saraswati to ask her a question. In this state, of course, their bodies were made neither of the matter like earth, nor psychosomatic factors like the prana, the life force. It was like two dream objects conversing with each other. Lila asked Saraswati, how was it that we were seen by this family of mine here, and we were not seen by my husband, who was ruling a kingdom when we visited him? Saraswati answered, then you are still clinging to your notion, I am Lila. Now you have overcome that body consciousness. Till the consciousness of duality is completely dispelled, you cannot act in the infinite consciousness. You cannot even understand it, even as one standing in the sun does not know the coolness of the shade of a tree. But now if you go to your husband, you will be able to deal with him as before. Lila said, O divinity, it was here itself that my husband was the holy man and I was his wife. Here again I was his queen. Here he died, and here again he rules now. Please take me where I can see him. Saraswati said, Lila, you and your husband have been through many incarnations, 3 of which you now know. In this incarnation, the king has slipped deep into the snare of worldliness, and he thinks, I am the Lord, I am strong, I am happy, etc. Though from the spiritual standpoint the whole universe is experienced here, from the physical point of view, millions of miles separate the planes. In the infinite consciousness, in every atom of it, universe comes and goes like particles of dust in a beam of light that shines through a hole in the roof. These come and go like ripples of the oceans. Leela reminisced, O divinity, since emerging as a reflection in the infinite consciousness, I have had 800 births. Today I see this. I have been a nymph, a vicious human woman, a serpent, a forest tribal woman, and on account of evil deeds I became a creeper, and by the proximity of sages I became a sage's daughter, I became a king, and on account of evil deeds done then I became a mosquito, a bee, a deer, a bird, a fish, and again I became a celestial, after which I became a tortoise and a swan, and I became a mosquito again. I have also been a celestial nymph when other celestials used to fall at my feet. Just as the scales of balance seesaw constantly, I have also been caught up in the seesaw of this repetitive existence, samsara. Rama asked, Holy Sir, how was it possible for the two ladies to travel to distant galaxies in the universe, and how did they overcome the numerous barriers on the way? Vasishta replied, O Rama, where is the universe? Where are galaxies? Where are barriers? The two ladies remained in the queen's inner apartment. It was there that the holy man Vasishta was ruling as King Viduratha. It was he who was King Padma before. All this happened in pure space. There is no universe, no distance, no barriers. Conversing with each other, the two ladies emerged from the room and proceeded towards a village on top of a mountain. The beauty and the glory of that mountain are indescribable. All its houses were literally covered with flowers that continually dropped from the trees. Young women slept in their rooms on beds made of clouds. The houses were illuminated by lightning. On account of the intensity of her practice of the yoga of wisdom, Leela had acquired full knowledge of the past, present, and future. She recollected the past and said to Saraswati, O divinity, some time ago I was an aged woman and I lived here. I was devoted to righteousness in every way, but I had never practiced inquiry into the nature of the self. Who am I, and what is this world? My husband was also a good, righteous, and learned man, but his inner intelligence had also not been awakened. We were exemplars in conduct, and by such conduct we taught others how they should live. After saying this, Leela showed to Saraswati her previous dwelling in the village on top of the mountain and continued, See, this is my favorite calf. On account of my separation, it does not even eat grass and has been constantly weeping for the past 8 days. In this place, my husband ruled the world. Because of his strong willpower, and since he was determined to be a great king, soon he had indeed become an emperor within a short span of 8 days. Though it looked like a long, long time. Just as air moves about unseen in space, even so in the space of this house, my husband lives unseen. Here in the space of the size of a thumb, we imagined the kingdom of my husband to be a million square miles. O divinity, surely both my husband and I are pure consciousness. Yet, on account of the mysterious illusory power Maya, my husband's kingdom appears to encompass hundreds of mountains. This is truly marvelous. I wish to enter into the capital city where my husband rules. Come, let us go there. For what is possible of achievement to the industrious? Vasishta continued. Along with Saraswati, the queen Lila rose into the sky. They went beyond the region of the pole star, beyond the realms of the sages of perfection, even beyond the realms of the gods, of Brahma, Goloka, and the realms of Shiva, and of the mains and of the liberated ones. From there, Lila saw that even the sun and the moon were far below and were barely visible. Saraswati said to Lila, Dear one, you have to go beyond even this to the very top of the head of creation. All that you have seen is just a few particles that have emanated from there. Soon they had reached this summit, for their will becomes adamantine, whose consciousness is pure and unveiled. There, Leela saw that this creation was enveloped by layers of water, fire, air, and space, and beyond that was pure consciousness. The supreme infinite consciousness is pure, peaceful, free from illusions, established in its own glory. In that, Leela saw countless creations floating like dust particles in light. The self-projections of the Jivas dwelling in those universes gave them their forms and nature. Because of the essential nature of this infinite consciousness, all these keep arising and by their own thought force return to a state of tranquility. All this is like the spontaneous play of a child. Rama asked, What do people mean by above, below, and so on when only the infinite is truth? Vasishta replied, O Rama, just as when little ants crawl all over a round rock, what is under their feet is always below, and what is behind their back is always above. Even so, people talk of these directions. Of these countless universes, O Rama, in some there are only plants, some have Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, and others as the presiding deities, and some have none at all. In some there are only animals and birds, in some there was only one ocean, some are solid rocks, some are inhabited only by worms, some are pervaded by dense darkness, and in some gods dwell. Some are forever illumined, some seem to be heading towards dissolution, some seem to be falling in space towards destruction. Since consciousness exists everywhere forever, creation of these universes and their dissolution also goes on everywhere forever. All these are held together by a mysterious omnipresent power. Everything exists in the one infinite consciousness, everything arises from it, it alone is everything. Vasishta continued. Having seen all this, Leela saw the inner apartment of the palace where the corpse of the king lay buried under a heap of flowers. There arose in her intense wish to behold her husband's other life. Instantly she broke through the summit of the universe and entered into the realm where her husband now ruled. At the same time, a mighty king who ruled over the Sindhu region was laying siege to her husband's kingdom. As the two ladies were coursing the space above the battlefield, they encountered countless celestials who had assembled there to witness the battle and the exploits of the great heroes. Rama asked, Please tell me, who is a hero among soldiers and who is a beast or a war criminal? Vasishta replied, Rama, he who fights a battle which is in accordance with the scriptural injunctions, on behalf of righteous king of unblemished conduct, whether he dies in battle or wins, he is a hero. He who fights for an unrighteous monarch, who tortures people and mutilates their bodies, even if he dies fighting in battle, he is a beast, or criminal and goes to hell. He who fights to protect the cattle, holy men, friends, or they who have taken his asylum, he is an ornament of heaven. On the other hand, they who fight for a king who delights in harassing people, they go to hell. Only the hero who dies in a battle goes to heaven. They who fight unrighteously, even if they die in battle, do not go to heaven. Still standing in the sky, Leela saw the two great armies closing in on each other, ready to engage themselves in battles. There follows a graphic description of the state of readiness of the armies and of the different formations, as also the fierceness of the battle and the gruesome scene of destruction that followed it. All these are omitted in this translation. Swami Venkateshananda. As evening set in, Leela's husband held a council with his ministers concerning the events of the morning, and then he went to sleep. The two ladies left the palace where they stood watching the fierce battle and, traveling like a breath of air, entered into the apartment where the king was asleep. Rama asked, Holy One, the body seems to be so large and heavy, how does it enter through a minute hole? Vasishta replied, O Rama, indeed it is impossible for one who is rooted in the idea that he is a physical body to pass through subtle hole or tube. It is the innermost conviction that I am the body which is obstructed thus in its movement. That in fact manifests as such obstruction. When the former is absent, the later is absent too. Just as water ever remains water and flows down, and fire does not abandon its nature of rising up, consciousness remains forever consciousness. But he who has not understood this does not experience its subtlety or true nature. As is his understanding, so is his mind. For it is the understanding that is the mind. Yet its direction can be changed by great effort, normally one's action or in accordance with one's mind. But he who knows that the body is ethereal, how can his movement be obstructed? In truth, everyone's body everywhere is pure consciousness, but on account of an idea that arises in someone's heart, there seems to be all this coming and going. For the same infinite consciousness is also the individual consciousness and the cosmic space. Therefore, the ethereal body can enter anything, anywhere, and it goes where the wish of its heart leads. O Rama, everyone's consciousness is of this nature and power. In everyone's consciousness, there is a different idea of the world. Death and such other experiences are like cosmic dissolution, the night of cosmic consciousness. When that comes to an end, everyone wakes up to his own mental creation, which is the materialization of his ideas, notions, and delusions. Even as the cosmic being creates the universe after the cosmic dissolution, the individual creates his own world after his death. However, divinities like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, as also holy sages, attain final liberation during cosmic dissolution, and their creation of the next cycle is not from memory. In the case of other beings, the new creation after the death in the previous one is conditioned by the impressions left in the mind by the various experiences during that lifespan. In the case of other beings, the new creation after the death is conditioned by the impressions left in the mind by the various experiences during that lifespan. Vasishta continued, immediately after death, the state in which it may be said that one is neither here nor there, when the consciousness, as it were, slightly opens the eyes though it seems not to do so, that state is known as pradhana, or the material or inert state of consciousness. It is also known as ethereal nature, unmanifest nature, and it is regarded both as sentient and insentient. It is this which is responsible both for memory and its absence, and therefore for the next birth. When that ethereal nature becomes awakened, and when in its consciousness the ego sense manifests itself, it gives rise to the five elements, space-time continuum, and all the rest of the material needed for the physical birth and existence. These then condense into their material counterparts. During dreaming and waking states, they give rise to the feeling of a physical body. But in fact, all this constitutes the ethereal body of the Jiva. When the idea I am the body becomes deeply ingrained, the same ethereal body develops the physical characteristics of a body, like the eyes, etc. Though all this happens only like vibrations or movements in air. Even if all these appear to be real, they are as unreal as the experience of sexual pleasure in a dream. Wherever one dies, there itself the Jiva sees all this happening. In that space, in that field of consciousness itself, he imagines, this is the world, this am I, and believing that he is born, he experiences the world which is nothing but space. He, the Jiva, is space too. He thinks he is my father, she is my mother, this is my wealth, I have done this wonderful deed, I have also sinned, etc. He imagines I have become a small child and now I have become a youth, and sees all these in his heart. This forest, known as creation, arises in the heart of every Jiva. Wherever a person dies, there and then he sees this forest. In this manner, countless worlds born in the consciousness of individual Jivas have in time vanished. Even so, countless Brahmas, Rudras, Vishnus, and suns have vanished. In this manner, the illusory perception of creation has taken place countless times, is taking place now, and will take place in the future. For all this is non-different from the movement of thought, which again is not independent of the infinite consciousness. In reality, what is mental activity but consciousness? And that consciousness is the supreme truth. Vasishta continued. The two ladies entered the apartment of the king like two divinities, resplendent like two moons. By their grace, the king's attendants were fast asleep. As they took their seats, the king awoke and beheld them. He sat down and worshipped their lotus-like feet with flowers. Saraswati wished that his minister should acquaint Leela with the king's ancestry. By her will, the minister awoke. When Saraswati asked the king who he was, the minister informed the ladies that he was a descendant of the great king Ikshwaku, that his father was Nabhorata, who, when the son was 10 years old, had entrusted the kingdom to him and retired to the forest to lead a spiritual life. The king's name was Vidurata. Saraswati then blessed Vidurata by laying her hand on his head and inspired him to recollect the facts of his own previous lives. Instantly the king remembered everything and asked Saraswati, "O goddess, how is it that though it is hardly one day since I died, it seems that I have lived in this body a full 70 years? And how is it that I remember all the things that happened when I was young in this lifespan?" Saraswati replied, "O king, at the very moment of your death and in the very place of your death, all this that you are seeing here manifested. All this is where the holy man Vasishta lived, in the village on the hill. That is his world, and in that world is the world of King Padma. And in that world of King Padma is the world that you are in. Living in it, you think these are my relations, these are my subjects, these are my ministers, these are my enemies. You think that you are ruling. You are engaged in religious rites. You think that you have been fighting with your enemies and you were defeated by them. You think you are seeing us, worshipping us, and that you are receiving enlightenment from us. You think I have overcome all sorrow and I enjoy supreme bliss. I shall be established in the realization of the Absolute. All this took no time to happen. Even as in no time during a dream a whole life's drama is enacted. In reality you are unborn, nor do you die. You see all this, as it were, though you do not see, for when all this is nothing other than the infinite consciousness. Who sees what? Vidurata asked, "Then are not these my ministers independent beings?" To the enlightened person there is only one infinite consciousness, and there is no notion of I am or these are. While Vasishta said this, another day came to an end. Saraswati continued, "To an immature and childish person who is confirmed in his conviction that this world is real, it continues to be real. Even as a child who believes in a ghost is haunted by it throughout his life. If a person is enamored of the appearance of the bracelet, he does not see that it is just gold. He who sees the glory of palaces, elephants, and cities does not see the infinite consciousness which alone is true. The universe is but a long dream. The ego sense and also the fancy that there are others are as real as dream objects. The sole reality is the infinite consciousness which is omnipresent, pure, tranquil, omnipotent, and whose very body and being is absolute consciousness. It is not an object, not knowable. Wherever this consciousness manifests in whatever manner, it is that. Hence, when the seer fancies seeing a human being happens there. Because the substratum, the infinite consciousness, is real, all that is based on it acquires reality, though the reality is of the substratum alone. This universe and all beings in it are but a long dream. To me you are real, and to you I am real, even so others are real to you or to me. And this relative reality is like the reality of the dream objects. Rama asked, "Holy One, in the case of a city which appeared in one's dream, it continues to be if it is a real city. Is this what you imply in your teaching?" Vasishta replied, "You are right, O Rama. Since the dream of a city, etc., is based on the real substratum of infinite consciousness, these dream objects appear to be real. But then there is no real difference between the waking state of consciousness and the dream state. What is real in the one is unreal in the other. Hence, both these states are essentially of the same nature. Therefore, the objects of the waking or the dreaming consciousness are equally unreal, except for the infinite consciousness on which they are all superimposed." After having imparted the teaching to the king, Saraswati blessed him and said, "May all auspiciousness attend you. You have seen what is to be seen. Give us leave to go." Vidurata said, "Soon, O goddess, I shall go from here, just as one goes from one dream to another in sleep. Please grant that my ministers and my virgin daughter may go with me." Saraswati granted his prayer. Saraswati said, "O king, you shall die in this war, and then you will regain your previous kingdom. After your death in this body, you will come over to the previous city with your daughter and your ministers. We too shall go now as we came, and all of you will of course follow us in due course. for the nature of the motion of a horse, an elephant, and a camel is different. Vasishta continued. Even as Saraswati was saying this to the king, a royal messenger rushed in to announce that the enemy forces had entered the capital and were destroying it. There was an incendiary raid in progress, and the entire city was ablaze. The two ladies, the king and his ministers, moved to a window to witness the dreadful scene. Looting of the city had commenced, and the robbers were yelling fiercely everywhere. The entire city was enveloped in dense smoke. Fire was raining from the sky. Missiles described half-moon-shaped flaming streaks in the sky. Heavy rock-like missiles were falling on the house, destroying them and the road around. The king and the others heard the pitiable cries of the citizens. Everywhere there was weeping and wailing, the heart-rending cries of women and children. Someone was crying, "Oh dear!" This woman had lost her father, mother, brother, and a little infant. Though she has not perished, the tragedy of her life is burning her heart. Another shouted, "Get out of that house quickly! It is about to collapse." Yet another, "Look, bombs and weapons rain into every house." Missiles were raining like the downpour that precedes cosmic dissolution. All the trees around the house had been burnt and the whole place looked desolate. What looked like elephants had been propelled into the air from the battlefield, and they were raining fire on the city. And there were roadblocks everywhere. Bound by attachment, men tarried in burning houses looking for their wives and children. Even women of the royal household were being dragged about by the invading soldiers. Weeping and wailing, these noble ladies did not know what to do. They cried, "Alas, who will help us in this terrible situation?" And they were surrounded by soldiers. Such is the glory of sovereignty, kingdoms, and empires. Vasishta continued. In the meantime, the queen arrived there. The lady in waiting announced her to the king. She said, "Your Majesty, all the other ladies of the harem have been violently dragged away by the enemy. From this indescribable calamity that has befallen us, only Your Majesty can redeem us." The king bowed down to Saraswati and excused himself. "I shall myself go to the battlefront, O goddess, to deal with the enemy, and this my wife will wait upon you during that time." The enlightened Lila was amazed to see that the queen was a complete replica of herself. She asked Saraswati, "Oh, divinity, how is it that she is exactly what I am? Whatever I was in my own youth, she is now. What is the secret of this? Also, all these ministers, etc., who are here are the same that were there in our palace. If they were but a reflection or the objects of our fancy, are they sentient? And are they also endowed with consciousness?" Saraswati replied, "O Leela, whatever vision arises within oneself, that is immediately experienced. Consciousness itself becomes, as it were, the object of knowledge. When in consciousness the image of the world arises, at that very instant it becomes so. Time, space, duration, objectivity do not arise from matter, for then they would be material. What is reflected in one's consciousness shines outside also. What is regarded as a real objective world experienced in the waking state is no more real than that experienced during sleep. During sleep, the world does not exist, and during the waking state, the dream does not exist. Even so, death contradicts life. While living, death is non-existent, and in death, life is non-existent, because that which holds together either experience is absent in the other. One cannot say that either is real or unreal, but one can only say that the substratum alone is real. The universe exists in Brahman only as a word and idea. It is neither real nor unreal. Just as a snake in the rope is neither real nor unreal, even so is the existence of the Jiva. This Jiva experiences its own wishes. It fancies that it experiences what it had experienced before, and some other are new experiences. They are similar at times and dissimilar at times. All these experiences, though essentially unreal, appear to be real. Such is the nature of these ministers and others. Even so, this Leela exists as the product of the reflection in consciousness. Even so are you, me, and all others. Know this and rest in peace. The second Leela said to Saraswati, "O divinity, I used to worship Saraswati and she used to appear to me in my dreams. You look exactly like her. I presume that you are Saraswati. I humbly beg of you to grant me a boon. When my husband dies in the battlefield, may I accompany him to whichever realm he goes in this very body of mine." Saraswati replied, "O dear lady, You have worshipped me for a long time with intense devotion. Therefore I grant you the boon sought by you. The first Leela thereupon said to Saraswati, Truly your words never fail. Your wish always comes true. Please tell me why you did not allow me to travel from one plane of consciousness to another with the same body. Saraswati replied, My dear Leela, I did not really do anything to anyone. Every Jiva earns its own state by its own deeds. I am merely the deity presiding over the intelligence of every being. I am the power of its consciousness and its prana, the life force. Whatever form the energy of the living being takes within itself, that alone comes to fruition in course of time. You longed for liberation and you obtained it. You may consider it the fruit of austerity or worship of the deity. But it is consciousness alone that bestows the fruit upon you, even as the fruit that seems to fall from the sky really falls from the tree. Vasishta continued. As they were talking among themselves like this, the king Vidurata ascended his resplendent chariot and proceeded to the battlefront. Unfortunately, he had not assessed the relative strength of his and the enemy's forces right up to the moment he actually entered in the enemy's ranks. The two Leelas, Saraswati as also the princess who had received the blessing of Saraswati, were watching the terrible war from their apartment in the palace. The sky was crowded with the missiles from both the armies. The battle cries of the warriors were heard everywhere. There was a pall of smoke and dust over the entire city. Even as the king Vidurata entered the ranks of the enemy, there was an intense sound of intense crossfire. As the missiles collided, there were sounds like kut-put, tuk-tuk, jin-jin. The second Leela asked Saraswati, O goddess, please tell me, why is it that, though we are blessed by you, my husband cannot win the battle? Saraswati replied, No doubt, I was adored by the king Vidurata for a considerable time, but he did not pray for victory in battle. Being the consciousness that dwells in the understanding of every person, I bestow upon that person that which he seeks. Whatever it be that a person asks of me, I bestow upon him that fruit. It is but natural that fire gives you heat. He had asked for liberation, and he shall attain liberation. On the other hand, the king of Sindhu worshipped me and prayed for victory in battle. Hence the king Vidurata will be slain in battle, and he will rejoin you both, and in course of time will attain liberation. This king of Sindhu will win the war and will rule the country as the victorious monarch. Vasishta continued. As the ladies were witnessing the battle, the sun rose in the eastern horizon as if eager to witness the concluding phase of this terrible battle. Surrounded by 1,000 soldiers each, the two kings fought each other. Their missiles had several different shaped sizes. Some of them, though, were single-headed when they left the ground, multiplied into 1,000 in the air, and rained literally in tens of thousands when they hit the target. Both the kings were well matched in strength and valor. Vidurata's was inborn, while the strength of the enemy was derived from a boon he had obtained from Lord Narayana. While they fought, their armies watched dumbfounded. At one stage, when it looked as though Vidurata was winning, the second Leela was highly elated and pointed him out to Saraswati. But the very next moment, the enemy emerged unscathed. For every deadly missile of one, the other used a counter-missile. The missile that created depression was countered by one that inspired the warriors. The serpent missile had its antidote. The water missile was met with the fire missile, and the Vishnu missile was used by both the kings. Both the kings lost their vehicles, and they continued to fight standing on the ground. As Vidurata was about to ascend a new one, he was cut down by the king of Sindhu. Vidurata's body was soon brought to the palace, which the pursuing enemy could not enter on account of Saraswati's presence. Vasishta continued. Soon after the king Vidurata fell, there was utter post-war confusion and chaos in the city. The king of Sindhu announced that his son would be the new ruler. There was great rejoicing among his subjects, and his ministers quickly got ready for the coronation. Immediately, the new administration proclaimed martial law in the new state, which restored peace and order to it. Seeing Vidurata fall, the second Leela fell down unconscious. The first Leela said to Saraswati, O goddess, see this, my husband is about to give up the ghost. Saraswati said, Dear one, all this terrible war, this destruction and death are as real as a dream. For there is neither a kingdom nor the earth. All this took place in the house of the holy man Vasishta on top of the hill. This palace and this battlefield and all the rest of it is nowhere but the inner apartments of your own house. In fact, the entire universe is there, for within the house of the holy man is the world of the king Padma, and within the palace of the of that King Padma in that world is all that you have seen here. All this is mere fancy, hallucination. What is the sole reality, which is neither created nor destroyed. It is that infinite consciousness that is perceived by the ignorant as the universe. Just as a whole city exists within the dreamer, the three worlds exist in a small atom. Surely there are atoms in those worlds, and each one of those atoms also contains the three worlds. The other Leela who fell down unconsciousness already reached that world in which your husband Padma body is lying. Leela asked, "Oh goddess, tell me, how did she go there already, and what are the people there telling her?" Saraswati replied, "Just as both of you are the fancied objects of the king, even so the king himself and I are dream objects. One who knows this gives up looking for objects of perception. In the infinite consciousness, we have created each other in our fancy. The other youthful Leela was indeed yourself. She worshipped me and prayed that she would never be widowed. Hence, before the king Vidurta died, she left this place. Dear one, you are all individualized cosmic consciousness. But I am the cosmic consciousness, and I make all these things happen." Vasishta continued, "O Rama, the second Leela who had obtained a boon from Saraswati rose into the sky and there met her daughter. The girl introduced herself to Leela, and Leela requested her to guide her to where her husband the king was. The girl thereupon flew away with her mother. First they passed through the regions of the clouds, then they passed through the regions of air. Beyond that they went through the orbit of the sun into the starry heaven. They proceeded still further to the realms of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu and Shiva, and after all that into the summit of the universe. They were able to do all this even as the coolness of ice is able to radiate from the ice jar without breaking it. Of course, Leela, who had an ethereal body composed of materialized thought, experienced all this within herself. Passing beyond even this universe, Leela crossed over the oceans and the other elements that envelops this universe, and entered into the infinite consciousness. In that infinite consciousness, there are countless universes which do not know of one another's existence. Leela entered one of those universes in which lay the body of King Padma covered with a heap of flowers. She again passed through the regions of the gods, Brahma, etc., entered the city and the palace in which the body lay. But alas, when she looked around, she could not see her daughter, who had disappeared mysteriously. She recognized the king as her husband and thought that having died a warrior's glorious death on the battlefield, he had ascended to the hero's heaven. She thought, by the grace of Saraswati, I have physically reached this palace. I am the most blessed among persons. She began to fan the king's body. The first Leela asked Saraswati, seeing her, what did the servants of the king do? Saraswati answered, the king, the servants of the royal household, and all the rest of them are only infinite consciousness. However, since the substratum is a reflection of the infinite consciousness which is real, and since there is a conviction in the order of fanciful creation, they recognize one another. The husband says she is my wife, and the wife says he is my husband. She could not go in her own physical body to the new realm because light cannot coexist with darkness. And as long as there is one in oneself the blind notion of ignorance, wisdom does not arise. When the wisdom concerning one's ethereal body arises, the physical body ceases to be recognized as true. This is the fruit of the boon that I granted her. The recipient of the boon thinks, just as you have made me think by your boon, so I am. Therefore she thinks she has reached her husband's abode in her physical body. One may ignorantly see a snake in the rope, but the rope cannot behave like a snake. Saraswati said, only one who has arrived at wisdom can ascend to the ethereal realms, not the others. This Leela does not possess such wisdom. Hence she only fancied that she had reached the city where her husband dwelt. The enlightened Leela said, let that be as you say, O goddess, but please tell me, how did the objects acquire their characteristics, like heat and fire, coolness and ice, solidity of the earth? How did the world order, niyati, first arise, as also birth and death? Saraswati said, dear one, during the cosmic dissolution, the entire universe having disappeared, only the infinite Brahman remains in peace. This infinite being of the nature of the consciousness feels I am, and then I am an atom of light. Thus it experiences the truth of that statement within itself. It also fancies the existence within itself of the diverse creatures. And since its nature is pure and absolute consciousness, that fanciful creation appears to be a real creation, with objects of diverse characteristics in strict accord with the fancy of the infinite consciousness. Whatever, wherever, and however was conceived or fancied by the infinite consciousness during that first creation, all that has remained there and in that manner and with those characteristics even now. Thus was a definite order brought into being here. In fact, this order is inherent in infinite consciousness. All these objects and their characteristics were potentially present in it even during the cosmic dissolution. Into what else could they dissolve? Moreover, how can something become nothing? Gold that appears as bracelet cannot become formless entirely. Thus, although all elements of this creation are utter emptiness, yet whatever element was conceived of in the beginning with whatever characteristics its order has persisted until now. All this is only from the relative point of view. For the universe has not been created at all, and whatever is the infinite consciousness and nothing else. It is the nature of appearance to appear to be real, even though it is unreal. Such is the order, niyati, in the universe, that nothing until now has been able to alter it. It was the infinite consciousness itself that thought of all these elements within itself, and it experienced them within itself. And that experience appears to have materialized. Saraswati continued. According to the order that existed in the first creation, human beings were endowed with a lifespan of 1, 2, 3, or 400 years. The shortening or the lengthening of the lifespan is dependent upon the purity or the impurity of the following factors: country, time, activity, and the materials used and consumed. He who adheres to the injunctions of the scriptures enjoys the lifespan guaranteed by those scriptures. Thus the person lives a long life or a short life and reaches its end. The enlightened Lila said, "Kindly enlighten me concerning death. Is it unpleasant, unpleasant? What happens after death?" Saraswati said, "There are three types of human beings, my dear: the fool, one who is practicing concentration and meditation, and the yogi, or intelligent one. The two latter types of human beings abandon the body by the practice of yoga, of concentration and meditation, and depart at their sweet will and pleasure. But the fool, who has not practiced concentration or meditation, being at the mercy of forces outside himself, experiences great anguish at the approach of death. This fool experiences a terrible burning sensation within himself. His breathing becomes hard and labored. His body becomes discolored. He enters into dense darkness and sees the stars during the day. He gets dizzy. He is confused in his vision. He sees the earth as space and the sky as a solid earth. He experiences all sorts of delirious sensations, that is, falling into a well, entering into a stone, riding a fast vehicle, melting away like a snow, being dragged with a rope, floating away like a blade of grass, etc. He wishes to express his suffering, but is unable to do so. Gradually, his senses lose their power, and he is unable even to think. Therefore, he sinks in unwisdom and ignorance. The enlightened Lila asked, "Though every person is endowed with the 8 limbs, why does he experience all this agony and ignorance?" Saraswati replied, "Such is the order established in the beginning of a creation by the infinite consciousness. When the prana does not flow freely, the person ceases to live. But all this is imaginary. How can infinite consciousness cease to be? The person is nothing but infinite consciousness. Who dies and when? To whom does this infinite consciousness belong and how? Even when millions of bodies die, this consciousness exists undiminished." The enlightened Leela said, "Kindly proceed with your discourse on birth and death. Listening to it again will certainly deepen my wisdom." Saraswati said, "When there is cessation of the flow of the prana, the consciousness of the individual becomes utterly passive. Please remember that consciousness is pure, eternal, and infinite. It does not arise nor cease to be. It is ever there in the moving and unmoving creatures, in the sky, on the mountain, and in fire and in air. When life, breath, or prana ceases, the body is said to be dead or inert. The life breath returns to its source, air, and consciousness freed from memory and tendencies remains as a self. The atomic ethereal particle which is possessed of these memories and tendencies is known as Jiva, and it remains there itself, in the space where the dead body is, and they refer to it as preta, departed soul. That Jiva now abandons its ideas and what it had been seeing till then and perceives other things as in dreaming or daydreaming. After a momentary lapse of consciousness, this Jiva begins to fancy that it sees another body, another world, and another lifespan. Oh, Lila, there are 6 categories of such departed souls: bad, worse, and worst sinners, good, better, and best of virtuous ones. Of course, there are subdivisions among these too. The worst among the sinners undergo terrible sufferings in hell and then are born in countless living species before they see the end of their agony. They might even exist as trees for a long time. The middling among sinners also suffer lapse of consciousness for a considerable time, and then they are born as worms and animals. The light sinners are soon reborn as human beings. The best among the righteous ascended to heaven and enjoy life there. Later they are born in good and affluent families on earth. The middling among the righteous go to the regions of the celestials and return to the earth as children of Brahmanas, etc. Even the righteous among the departed ones, after enjoying such heavenly pleasure, have to pass through the realms of the demigod to suffer the consequence of the iniquities they might have committed. Saraswati continued. All these departed souls experience within themselves the fruition of their past action. At first there is the notion I am dead, and then I am being carried away by the messengers of the god of death. The righteous among them fancy that they are taken to heaven, and the ordinary sinners fancy that they are standing in the court of the god of death, where with the help of Chitragupta they are being tried and judged for their past life. Whatever the Jiva sees, that the Jiva experiences. For in this empty space of infinite consciousness there is nothing known as time, action, etc. Then the Jiva fancies, the god of death has sent me to heaven or hell, and I have enjoyed or suffered the pleasures or tortures of heaven or hell, and I am born as an animal, etc., as ordained by the god of death. At that moment, the Jiva enters into the body of the male through the food eaten. It is then transferred into the female and delivered into this world, where it undergoes life again in accordance with the fruits of past actions. There it grows and wanes like the moon. Once again it undergoes senility and death. This goes on again and again till the Jiva is enlightened by self-knowledge. The enlightened Lila asked, "Oh goddess, but please tell me how all this began in the very beginning." Saraswati replied, "The mountains, the forests, the earth and the sky, all these are but infinite consciousness. That alone is the very being of all, the reality in all. And hence that pure infinite consciousness appeared to become whatever form it took, whatever it manifested itself. Till now it continues to be so. The pure infinite consciousness appeared to become whatever form it took, whenever it manifested itself. Till now it continues to be so. When the prana enters into the bodies and begins to vibrate the various parts of the bodies, it is said that the bodies are living. Such living bodies existed right in the beginning of the creation. And those bodies into which the life breath had entered did not vibrate, they were known as trees and plants. It is indeed a small part of the infinite consciousness that becomes the intelligence in these bodies. This intelligence entering into the bodies brings into being the different organs like the eyes. Whatever this consciousness thinks it is, it takes that form. Thus this self of all exists in all bodies, with motion as the characteristic of moving bodies, immovability as the characteristics of the immovable bodies. Thus do all these bodies continue to be even now. Saraswati continued, when that intelligence, which is part of the infinite consciousness, fancied itself to be a tree, it became a tree. It fancies as a rock, it became a rock. Or grass, it became a grass. There is no distinction between the sentient and the insentient, between inert and intelligent. There is no difference at all in the essence of substances. For the infinite consciousness is present everywhere equally. The difference are only due to the intelligence identifying itself as different substances. The same infinite consciousness is known by different names in these different substances. In the same way, it is the same infinite consciousness that the intelligence identifies as the worms, ants, and birds. In it, there is no comparison, nor a sense of difference. Just as the people living in the North Pole do not know the people of the South Pole, each independent substance, identified as such by the intelligence, exists by itself, without distinction from other substances. Ascribing distinctions to them as sentient and insentient is like a frog born in a rock and frog born outside it, considering themselves different, one insentient and the other sentient. The intelligence which is a part of the infinite consciousness is everywhere, and it is everything. Whatever the intelligence thought of as itself, it became that in the very beginning of creation, and so it has remained ever since. It thought of itself as space. It thought of itself as the moving air. It thought of itself as the insentient. It thought of itself as a sentient. All this is nothing but the fancy of that intelligence. Such appearance is not the reality, though it appears to be real. O Leela, I think that now the King Viduratha wishes to enter into the heart of the body of King Padma. He is proceeding towards it. The enlightened Leela said, O goddess, let us also proceed in the same direction. Saraswati said, turning himself into the ego principle in the heart of Padma, Viduratha fancies that he is proceeding to another world. Let us proceed along our own paths. One cannot tread the path of the other. Vasishta continued, in the meantime, the prana left the body of the king Viduratha, even as birds abandon a tree that is about to fall. His intelligence rose into space in an ethereal form. Lila and Saraswati saw this and followed it. In few moments, that ethereal form became conscious, when the period of post-mortem unconsciousness came to an end. And the king fancied that he saw even the gross form which had been put together by the funeral rites performed by his relatives. With this he travelled towards the south and reached the abode of the god of the death, who declared that the king had not committed any sinful action at all, and ordered his messengers to let him enter his own previous body of Padma, which lay embalmed. Instantly the Jiva of Viduratha crossed over to the other universe in which Padma's body lay, and reached the palace. Obviously, Viduratha had been linked with Padma's body through the ego sense of the latter. Even as a man travelling in distant countries is still attached to the place where he has buried his treasure. Rama asked, O holy sir, if one's relative failed to perform the funeral rites properly, then how can that one obtain the ethereal form? Vasishta answered, whether the funeral rites have been duly performed or not, if the departed one believes that they have been performed, he gets the benefit of the ethereal form. This is a well-known truth. Whatever be one's consciousness, that one is. Things, objects or substances come into being on account of one's fancy, and one's fancy also arises from the things. Poison turns into nectar through one's fancy. Even so, an unreal object or substance becomes real when such intense faith is present. Without a cause, no effect is produced anywhere at any time, and therefore there is no fancy or thought either. Hence, but for the one causeless infinite consciousness, nothing whatsoever has ever arisen or been created. Rest assured of this. If the funeral rites are performed by one's relative with the right faith, it helps the intelligence of the departed soul, unless the latter is overpoweringly vicious. Let us return to the palace of King Padma. As I said, Leela and Saraswati re-entered that beautiful palace and the room in which the embalmed body of Padma had been kept. All the royal attendants were fast asleep. Vasishta continued, there, seated near the body of King Padma, they saw the second Leela, who was devoutly fanning the king. The first Leela and Saraswati saw her, but she did not see them. Rama asked, it was said that the first Leela had temporarily left her body near the king and travelled with Saraswati in an ethereal body. But now the first Leela's body is not mentioned at all. Vasishta replied, when the first Leela became enlightened, the egoistic fancy of her ethereal real being abandoned its links with the gross physical form, and it melted away like snow. In fact, it was Leela's ignorant fancy that made it appear as if she had a physical body. It was as if one dream and thinks I am a deer, and on waking up and finding the deer missing, does one go about searching for it? In the mind of the deluded, the unreal manifests itself. And then, when the delusion has been dispelled, like the realization that it's rope and not a snake, there is no longer an ignorant fancy. This fanciful conviction that the unreal is real is deeply rooted by repeated imagination. Even without destroying it, one can move from one ethereal body to another, just as in dream one can take one form after the another without abandoning the previous one. The yogi's body is truly invisible ethereal, even though it appears to be visible in the eyes of the ignorant beholder. And it is such a beholder who, on account of his own ignorance, thinks and says the yogi is dead. For where is the body, what exists and what dies? That which is. Only delusion vanished. Rama asked, Holy Sir, does a yogi's physical body then become an ethereal body? Vasishta replied, how many times I have told you, Rama, yet you do not grasp it. The ethereal body alone is. By persistent fancy, it appears to be linked to a physical body. Just as when an ignorant man who thinks he is the physical body dies and the body is cremated, has a subtle body, even so the yogi on being enlightened while living has an ethereal body. The physical body is only the creation of one's ignorant fancy and is not real. There is no difference between the body and the ignorance. To think they are two, this indeed is samsara. Vasishta continued. In the meantime, Saraswati restrained Vidurata's Jiva from entering into the body of King Padma. The enlightened Leela asked Saraswati, O goddess, from the time I sat here in contemplation till now, how much time has elapsed? Saraswati replied, Dear one, it is a month since you entered into contemplation. During the first 15 days, your body, on account of the heat generated by the pranayama, became vaporized. Then it became like a dry leaf and fell down. Then it became rigid and cold. The ministers then thought you had died of your own accord and cremated the body. Now, on account of your own wish, you appear here in your ethereal body. In you, there are no memories of past life nor latent tendencies brought forward from previous incarnation. For when the intelligence is established in the conviction of its ethereal nature, the body is forgotten. Even as in youth, one forgets life as a fetus. Today is the 31st day and you are here. Come, let's reveal ourselves to this other Leela. When the second Leela saw them before her, she fell at their feet and worshipped them. Saraswati asked her, Tell us how you came here. The second Leela replied, When I fainted in the palace of Vidurata, I did not know anything for some time. I then saw that my subtle body rose to the sky and was seated in an aerial vehicle which brought me here. And I saw that Vidurata was lying here asleep in a garden of flowers. I thought he was fatigued from battle, and without disturbing him, I fanned him. Saraswati immediately let Vidurata's Jiva enter the body. The king at once awoke as if from slumber. The two Leelas bowed to him. The king asked the enlightened Leela, Who are you? Who is she? And from where she has come? The enlightened Leela replied, Lord, I am your wife in your previous incarnation and your constant companion, even as a word and its meaning are. This Leela is your other wife. She is my own reflection created by me for your pleasure. And she who is seated on yonder golden throne is the goddess Saraswati herself. She is present here on account of her great good fortune. Hearing this, the king sat up and saluted Saraswati. Saraswati blessed him with long life, wealth, and so on, and enlightenment. Vasishta continued, After granting the desired boons to the king, Saraswati vanished at that spot. The king and the queen fondly embraced each other. The royal attendants who were guarding the king's body woke and rejoiced that the king had come back to life. There was a great rejoicing in the state. People far and wide recounted for a long time how the Queen Leela returned from the other world with another Leela as a gift to the king. The king heard from the enlightened Leela all that took place during the previous month. He continued to rule and enjoy the blessings of the three worlds through the grace of Saraswati, which he had no doubt earned by his own self-effort. Thus is the story of Leela, O Rama, which I have narrated in detail to you. Contemplation of this story will remove from your mind the least faith in the reality of what is perceived. Truly, if only that which is true can be removed, how can one remove what is unreal? There is nothing to be removed, for all that appears to be in your eyes is nothing but the infinite consciousness. And if something has been created, even that has taken place by it, within it itself. Everything is as it is, nothing has ever been created. You may say that what appears to be is the creation of Maya, but then Maya itself is not real. Rama said, Lord, what a grand vision of the ultimate truth you have given me. But Holy One, there is insatiable hunger in me for the nectar of your enlightening words. Pray explain to me the mystery of time. In the story of Leela, sometimes a whole lifetime was spent in 8 days, sometimes in 1 month. I'm puzzled. Are there different time scales in different universes? Vasishta replied, O Rama, whatever one thinks within oneself in his own intelligence, that alone is experienced by him. Even nectar is experienced as poison by him who fancies it as poison. Friends become enemies, and enemies become friends, depending upon one's inner attitude. The object is experienced by one strictly in accordance with one's inner feeling. To a suffering person, a night is an epoch, and a night of revelry passes like a moment. In dream, a moment is not different from an epoch. A lifetime of Manu is but an hour and a half to Brahma. Brahma's lifetime is a day for Vishnu. Vishnu's lifespan is Shiva's day. But to the sage, whose consciousness has overcome limitations, there is neither day nor night. Vasishta continued. The yogi knows that it's one's own mentality that turns sweet things into bitter things, and vice versa, and friends into enemies, and vice versa. In the same way, by changing the angle of vision and by persistent practice, one can develop a taste for the study of scriptures and for japa, etc., which were uninteresting earlier. For these qualities are not in the objects, but only in one's own thinking. Just as a seasick man sees the world go around, the ignorant man thinks that these qualities abide in the objects. A drunken man sees empty space where a wall stands, and a non-existent goblin kills a deluded person. This world is nothing but a mere vibration of consciousness in space. It seems to exist even as a goblin seems to exist in the eyes of the ignorant. All this is but Maya. For there is no contradiction between the infinite consciousness and the apparent existence of the universe. It is like a marvelous dream of a person who is awake. O Rama, in the autumn, the trees shed their leaves. In springtime, that same tree sprouts new leaves, which were surely within the trees themselves. Even so, this creation exists all the time within the absolute consciousness. It is not seen, even as the liquidity that exists in gold is not always evident. If the creator of one epoch attains liberation, and if the creator in the next epoch projects the new universe from his memory, even that memory is none other than the infinite consciousness. Rama asked, Lord, how is it that the king and also the citizens experience the same objective facts? Vasishta replied, this is because the intelligence of all the jivas is based upon the one infinite consciousness. The citizens too thought that he was their king. Thought vibrations are natural and inherent in the infinite consciousness, and they are not motivated. Even as it is natural for a diamond to sparkle, the king's intelligence thinks, I am King Vidurata, and so do all the beings in the universe. If one's intelligence is established in this truth concerning the infinite consciousness, it reaches the supreme state of liberation. This depends upon one's own intensity of self-effort. A man is pulled in two different directions, toward the realization of the Brahman, the Absolute, and towards the ignorant acceptance of the reality of the world. That which he strives to realize with great intensity wins. Once he overcomes the ignorance, the deluded vision of the unreal is forever dispelled. Rama asked, Holy Sir, please tell me briefly again, how does the delusion of the notions of the I and the world arise in the first place, without any cause? Vasishta replied, as all things are equally indwelt by intelligence, so at all times in every way the uncreated is all, the self of all. We use the expression all things. It is only a figure of speech, for only the infinite consciousness or Brahman exists. Just as there is no division between a bracelet and gold, no division between wave and water, there is no division between the universe and the infinite consciousness. The latter alone is the universe. The universe as such is not the infinite consciousness, just as the bracelet is made of gold, but gold is not made of bracelet. Just as we refer to a man and his limbs as being one and the same, we refer to the presence of the infinite consciousness as all beings, which does not imply a division or modification in it. In that infinite consciousness, there is inherent non-recognition of its infinite nature. That appears to manifest as I and the world. Just as there is an image in a marble slab, even if it has not been carved, even so this notion of I and the world exists in the infinite consciousness. Even as in a calm sea that the waves exist in their potential state, the world exists in a potential state in the infinite consciousness, and that is known as creation. The word creation has no other connotation. No creation takes place in the Supreme Being or the infinite consciousness, and the infinite consciousness is not involved in the creation. They do not stand in a divided relationship to each other. This infinite consciousness regards its own intelligence in its own heart, as it were, though it is non-different from it, even as wind is non-different from its own movement. At that very moment, when there is an unreal division, there arises in that consciousness the notion of space, which on account of the power of consciousness appears as the element known as the space. That itself later believes itself to be air and then fire. From this notion there arises the appearance of fire and light. That itself further entertains the notion of water with its inherent faculty of taste, and that itself believes itself to be the earth with its inherent faculty of smell and also its characteristic of solidity. Thus do the water and the earth elements appear to have manifested themselves. At the same time, the same infinite consciousness held in itself the notion of a unit of time equal to 1/1,000,000th of the twinkling of an eye, and from this evolved the time scale right up to an epoch, consisting of several revolutions of the 4 ages, which is the lifespan of one cosmic creation. The infinite consciousness itself is uninvolved in these, for it is devoid of rising and setting, and it is devoid of beginning, middle, and the end. The infinite consciousness alone is the reality, ever awake and enlightened, and with creation also it is the same. That infinite consciousness alone is the unenlightened appearance of this creation. And even after this creation, it is the same always. It is ever the same. When one realizes in the self, by the self, that consciousness is the absolute Brahman, then he experiences it as all, even as the one energy dwelling in all the limbs. One can say that the world appearance is real only so far as it is the manifestation of consciousness and because of direct experience. And it is unreal when it is grasped with the mind and the sense organs. Wind is perceived as real in its motion, and it appears to be non-existent when there is no motion. Even so, this world appearance can be regarded both as real and unreal. This mirage-like appearance of the three worlds exists as non-different from the absolute Brahman. The creation exists in Brahman just as the sprout exists in the seed, liquidity in water, sweetness in milk, pungency in capsicum, but in ignorance it appears to be different from and independent of Brahman. There is no cause for the world's existence as a pure reflection in the absolute Brahman. When there is a notion of creation, the creation seems to be. When through self-effort there is understanding of non-creation, there is no world. Nothing has ever been created anywhere at any time, and nothing comes to an end either. The absolute Brahman is all. The supreme peace, unborn, pure consciousness and permanent. Worlds within worlds appear in every atom. What can be the cause and how do these arise? As and when one turns away from the notion of I and the world, one is liberated. The notion of I am this is the soul bondage here. They who know the infinite consciousness as the nameless, formless substratum of the universe gain victory over samsara. Rama asked, it is evident that Brahman alone exists. But then why do even these sages and men of wisdom exist in this world, as if so ordained by God? And what is God? Vasishta replied, there does exist, O Rama, the power of energy of the infinite consciousness, which is in motion all the time. That alone is the reality of all inevitable futuristic events, for it penetrates all the epochs in time. It is by that power that the nature of every object in the universe is ordained. That power, Chit Shakti, is also known as Mahasatta, the great existence, Mahachitti, the great intelligence, Mahashakti, the great power, Mahadrishti, the great vision, Mahakriya, the great doer, Mahodbhava, the great becoming, Mahaspanda, the great vibration. It is this power that endows everything with its characteristic quality. But this power is not different from or independent of the absolute Brahman. It is as real as a pie in the sky. Sages make a verbal distinction between Brahman and the power and declare that creation is the work of that power. The distinction is verbal, even as one speaks of the body as a whole and its part. The infinite consciousness becomes aware of its inherent power, even as one becomes aware of the limbs of this body. Such awareness is known as niyati, the power of the absolute that determines nature. It is also known as Devam or divine dispensation. That you should ask me this question is ordained by niyati, and that you should act upon my teaching is also ordained by niyati. If one says the divine will feed me and remains idle, that also is the work of niyati. This niyati cannot set aside even by gods like Rudra. But wise men should not give up self-effort because of this, for niyati functions only as and through the self-effort. This niyati has two aspects, human and superhuman. The former is seen where self-effort bears fruit, and the later where it does not. If one remains idle, depending upon niyati to do everything for him, he soon discovers that his life departs, for life is action. He can, by entering into the highest superconscious state, stop the breath and attain liberation. But then, that is indeed the greatest self-effort. To remain non-action is indeed the greatest self-effort. The infinite consciousness alone appears as one thing in one place and another in another place. There is no division between that consciousness and its power, as there is no division between wave and water, limbs and the body. Such division is experienced only by the ignorant. Rama asked, when the only reality is the infinite consciousness and its own inherent kinetic power, how does the Jiva acquire an apparent reality in the secondless unity? Vasishta replied, in the mind of the ignorant alone does this terrible goblin known as Jiva arise as a reflected reality or appearance. No one, not even the men of wisdom or sages, can definitely say what it is, because it is devoid of any indication of its nature. If the mirror of infinite consciousness, countless reflections are seen, which constitute the appearance of the world. In the mirror of infinite consciousness, countless reflections are seen, which constitute the appearance of the world. These are the Jivas. Jivas is like unto just a little agitation on the surface of the ocean of Brahman, or just a little movement of the flame of a candle in windless room. When in that slight agitation the infinitude of the infinite consciousness is veiled, limitation of consciousness appears to arise. This too is inherent in the infinite consciousness, and that limitation of consciousness is known as the Jiva. Just as when a spark from a flame comes into contact with a flammable substance and bursts into an independent flame, even so this limitation of consciousness, when it is fed by latent tendencies and memories, condenses into egotism, I-ness. This I-ness is not a solid reality, but the Jiva sees it as real, like the blueness of the sky. When the egotism begins to entertain its own notions, it gives rise to the mind stuff, the concept of an independent and separate Jiva, Maya or cosmic illusion, cosmic nature, etc. The intelligence which entertains these notions conjure up the natural elements. Associated with these, the same intelligence becomes a spark of light, though it is the cosmic light in truth. It then condenses into countless forms. Somewhere it becomes a tree, somewhere a bird, etc. Somewhere it becomes a goblin, etc. Somewhere it becomes demigods. The first of such modification becomes the creator Brahma, and creates others by thought and will. Thus the vibration in consciousness alone is a Jiva, Karma, God, and all the rest follows. Creation of the mind is but agitation in its consciousness. Creation is a mind stuff and is nothing but agitation in consciousness, and the world exists in the mind. It seems to exist because of imperfect vision, imperfect understanding. It is really not more than a long dream. If this is understood, then all duality will come to an end, and Brahman, Jiva, mind, Maya, doer, action, and the world will all be seen as synonymous with the one non-dual infinite consciousness. Vasishta continued, the one never became many. Where many candles are kindled from one another, it is the same flame which burns in all candles. Even so, the one Brahman appears to be many. When one contemplates the unreality of this diversity, he is freed from sorrow. Jiva is nothing more than the limitation of consciousness. When the limitation goes, there is peace. Even as for one who wears shoes, the whole world is paved with leather. What is this world? Nothing but an appearance. Even as plantain stem is nothing but leaves. Even as liquor is able to make one see all sorts of phantasms in the empty sky, mind is able to make one see diversity in unity. Even as a drunkard sees a tree moving, the ignorant one sees movement in this world. When the mind perceives duality, when there is both duality and its counterpart, which is unity. When the mind drops the perception of duality, there is neither duality nor unity. When one is firmly established in the oneness of the infinite consciousness, whether he is quiet or actively engaged in work, then he is considered to be at peace with himself. When one is thus established in the supreme state, it is also known as a state of non-self or the state of knowledge of the void or emptiness. On account of the agitation of the mind, consciousness appears to become the object of knowledge. Then there arises in the mind all sorts of false notions like I am born, etc. Such knowledge is not different from the mind. Hence it is known as ignorance or delusion. To rid oneself of the disease of this samsara or world appearance, there is no remedy but wisdom or self-knowledge. Knowledge alone is the cure for the wrong perception of a snake in the rope. When there is such knowledge, then there is no craving in the mind for sense pleasure which aggravates the ignorance. Hence, if there is craving, do not fulfill it. What difficulty is there in this? When the mind entertains notions of object, there is agitation or movement in the mind. When there are no objects or ideas, then there is no movement of thought and mind. When there is movement, the world appears to be. When there is no movement, there is cessation of world appearance. The movement of thought itself is called Jiva, cause and action. That is the seed for world appearance. Then follows the creation of the body. Vasishta continued, on account of various causes, there is this movement of thought. Someone is freed from this in one lifetime, and someone else is freed in 1,000 births. When there is movement of thought, one does not see the truth. And then there is the feeling of I am, this is mine, etc. The world appearance is the waking state of consciousness. Egotism is a dreaming state. The mind stuff is the deep sleep state. And pure consciousness is the fourth state or uncontradicted truth. Beyond even this fourth state, there is absolute purity of consciousness. One who is established in it goes beyond sorrow. The world appearance is said to have absolute Brahman as its cause. In just the same way as the sky is the cause of growth of a tree. Since the sky does not obstruct its growth, it promotes or causes it. The world appearance is said to have the absolute Brahman as its cause in just the same way as the space is the cause of the growth of a tree. Since the space does not obstruct its growth, some may say that the space is promoting the tree. In fact, Brahman is not an active causative factor, and this is revealed by inquiry. Even as one digging the solid earth finds empty space as he continues to dig, when the inquiry is continued, you will find the truth that all this is none other than the infinite consciousness. Rama asked, pray tell me how this creation becomes so extensive. The vibration in the consciousness is not different from that consciousness itself. Vasishta continued. From that vibration, just as the Jiva becomes manifest, even so from the Jiva, the mind becomes manifest, because the Jiva thinks. The mind itself entertains the notions of the five elements and it transforms itself into those elements. Whatever the mind thinks of, that alone it sees. After this, one by one, the Jiva acquires the sense organs, the tongues, the eyes, the nose, the sense of touch, etc. In this, there is no causal connection between the mind and the senses. There is just the coincidence of the thought and of the manifestation of the sense organs. Just like a crow sits on a palm tree and accidentally the fruit drops from it, and it appears that the crow dislodged it. Thus, the first cosmic Jiva came into being. Holy Sir, Rama said, if ignorance is non-existent in truth, then why should one even bother about liberation or about inquiry? Vasishta replied, Rama, that thought should arise in its own time, not now. Flowers bloom and fruits ripen in their due time. The cosmic Jiva utters Om and by pure will creates the various objects. Just as the creator Brahma was willed into being, even so is a worm brought into being. Because the latter is caught up in impurity, its action is trivial. This distinction is illusory. In truth, there is no creation and hence no division at all. The end of the story of Leela.